My guest today is Dr. Charles Buhler. He's the co-founder of Exodus Propulsion Technologies and lead scientist and co-founder of NASA's Electrostatics and Surface Physics Laboratory at Kennedy Space Center. He has a PhD in condensed matter physics from Florida State, and he received that in 2000 while working on high-temperature superconductors at the National High Magnetic Field Laboratory. He joins us today to discuss his independent research and patented technologies that require no fuel or ejection mass. There was a recent article from the Debrief that some of you may have seen that brought this back into the front of our minds, and I'm really excited to have him on today. I also just want to mention that any statements that Dr. Buhler makes are, of course, his own and don't necessarily represent the opinions of NASA or any other organization. So with that said, let's go ahead and welcome in Dr. Buhler. Hi, Future James here. As you're about to see, the audio and video quality was really not up to the standard that I would like it to be. We were facing some connection issues during our discussion. And so I just want to acknowledge that and express that I'm in the process of determining some better ways to improve the audio and video quality for future interviews. I want to apologize to Dr. Buhler for that and also thank him for coming on the show and let you know that you're welcome back anytime, sir. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the interview. In your own words, tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, how you got into this. And something that I like to ask all my guests is, as a child, was this something that you thought about? Was this a future or a career that you saw for yourself? Or is this something that you found later in life?
Oh, I think I've been fascinated by Propellant-less propulsion school. So back in the early 90s. And that kind of led my career through Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and Florida State University. Temperature superconductors and working with the world's largest magnets in Tallahassee, and then eventually going to NASA. So I would say it's been a long journey. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated with the whole propulsion idea, thinking that there was always a potential solution. I always believed that, and we've had a lot of physics since the 17th century. Newtonian probably had a way. We just had to uncover it. So that's what I set out to do in my spare time.
Right on. I think that it's funny that we're kind of jumping into this already, but I've been doing some of my own research into the history of sort of electrical engineering through Maxwell and Heaviside, and sort of the ways that Heaviside simplified the Maxwell equations, and the potential that by removing some of those aspects of his quaternion math, we may have actually lost some of our potential engineering capabilities or understanding of what's actually going on here. Would you be able to speak to that at all?
Oh God, no, but I've heard about the expanded set of Maxwell's equations and how you can add different things. For example, the vector potentials, some of the scalar functions that were removed over the years, and you'll get some interesting results. Because what we see is not the generalized Maxwell equations; we see a specific set of them. But I don't need to use that for what I'm doing. I believe. I think what we is adequate, from what I
see.
understand.
Okay, that's
Could
fascinating.
be wrong though, but
Yeah. So it's possible, because at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've gathered from watching some of your other interviews, we don't necessarily have a good handle on the fundamentals of what's actually going on, kind of, at the baseline of the code, for example, if we kind of consider it in that fashion. Is that a correct guesstimate? Is that accurate? Or since you've kind of done those other interviews, have you
I would
perhaps gained more insight?
say, we have a classical formalism. I think that would be the thing to say. And, we spin quantum mechanics as needed to match the experiment. But we don't have a quantum foundation phenomenon. Right. I think that's yet to come. I think that's something that, scientists much smarter than an IQED to train some of these things.
I see. I
But
see.
the classical form system, based on conservation of energy, seems to be enough to tell us kind of what to do, what to build, and that's been helpful. And but it's probably not the most accurate theory,
Right.
I would say, because it's not it's not fundamental, at least in terms of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics play a role. What's nice about it, though, is that where we put the quantum in the fine structure constant, and that's pretty exciting because there's not a lot of experiments out there that you can use, you can build in your garage or in your house to test the fine structure constant, which is the coupling constant between fields and matter. So this technology kind of poses um, a nice tool, if you will, in your toolbox to try to probe that, if you like. Um, and I plan on, showing people how to use thruster in their house, because I don't expect anyone to believe this. But if they do it themselves, like many have since the article came out, they'll see that, oh, there's something to this, and I want to understand it more. And at least, open up the possibility that this is actually a real phenomenon. I'm not going to claim to have all answers, but there's enough physics that I know that at least can tell me how to improve, how to build upon it, and what to test for, and what to build essentially.
Right on. Okay,
But
that's cool.
that you can probe that fine structure concept, because that's really one of the biggest ones in all of quantum mechanics is, what is the source of the fine structure? What is it? Where does it come from? We don't know much about it.
Right. And I believe, if I'm not mistaking this with Euler's number, it's a unitless number, which is also kind of curious. Right.
It is, but it's a unitless number. It's show between the Coulomb energy of two particles at a distance by a photon of that distance, that length.
Right. As
And
well as,
coupling between fields and matter. It almost has to be in, what's that?
I was going to say, it also
Yeah,
appears in a lot of
the
nature,
couple.
right?
Oh my gosh, it's everywhere. Gibbs free energy. It's in the Helmholtz equation. It's in all over the place, and it just pops up everywhere. So, but here kind of has a natural fit as a couple between charge, because we're applying a field to a charge, and we're getting some macroscopic effects from that. So that's very interesting that alpha kind of popped there.
Right.
Um, so whatever quantum mechanical derivation folks have, they'll have to explain that. The alpha should be there. That is in the interaction physics 3D for
I see.
sure.
I see.
Scatter theory. So
That's fascinating. I think this is probably an appropriate time. Would you mind just, so there was an article that recently released, and actually, as I was reading through that article, I realized that much of that was actually just kind of a reinterpretation of your interview that you did with Tim Ventura about 4 months ago. So I got most of it from watching that video, but I was hoping that you would just be able to briefly kind of break down what exactly your patent is. And I also have a couple other questions. You mentioned that it took you guys 25 years of testing other ideas before realizing that electrostatics was the potential avenue. So I'd like to kind of dive into some of that. But before, would you mind just kind of giving us a brief overview, real briefly, of your new patent there?
um, the patent is using what we call the electrostatic pressure force, or the divergence in electric field, to move an object, and how you would make that with different metal sheets, with different dielectrics, with different voltages, with different. It's pretty general, but if you're going to use that, the patent describes many ways to do that. That's what we've patented. Many different configurations that we've tested, but not over 25 years. Testing, my partner Andrew Arajima and I have been testing separately for, gosh, more than 25 years. But we didn't get together until April of 15, so 8 years ago. And that's when things kind of took off. That's once we figured out that it was electrostatics, electronics, then the patents say, okay, and test it again. And then we've made together, well, he has, I'll give him all the credit for making the majority of these thrusters. He's made over 50 of them. So
Wow.
that's a lot. And that is, and he tests every day, God bless him, and nothing stops him. He has no kids, so he can do that. um,
Touche.
but it has been, yeah. But he's great. He's fantastic. At anything I say, he will build. So I have to be very careful what I say.
Right. You asked
And
for the
then
moon.
we'll upon that and make whatnot.
Right.
Yes,
I
so I
see.
just have to be very careful. But it covers geometry, shapes. It covers materials and dials and um, charge to a surface, those kinds of things. Um, but the aim is to, kind of share that path, let people do it, let people see how it's done, to believe for themselves. This is something you can build in a garage. I'm going to make a separate video probably tomorrow on how to assemble one of those. Um, um, it's similar to how, if you've heard of the lifter, right? The little wire things with the
Yeah.
foil,
Kind of inspired by T.T. Brown.
30,000 volts, and they lift off
Right.
inspired by TT. But those operate by ion wind, right? But it
Mhm.
wasn't until they were making a lot of them before the scientists came in there and say, you know what, wind thrusters, not propellant-less propulsion, but ion wind thrusters.
Right.
And the interesting thing about the exodus effect, they call it this effect. This is the kind of the opposite of that. So the forces, if you look at them carefully, kind of if you put it in air and you do make an ion wind because you have an ace capacitor, you will see that the thruster actually goes in the direction of the wind. So think of it for a second. Imagine a
Huh.
rocket moving in the direction of the plume.
So you're
That's
pulling it. You're
that's what
pulling
the
it
X
forwards
effect.
almost.
Yeah. So you're going in the direction of the wind, which is kind of odd. So it's, um, we obviously don't like ion wind. Thrusters operate in DC mode. Any current usually kills the thrust, which kills force because it collapses the field. So we try to keep these things either encapsulated or work them well below limit, below the ion generation limit. We do them in high vacuum. Testing in air is not something we've been doing. It's in the last half years, but we'll be happy to share the in-air thrusters that finally got us off the ground to say, okay, this is how it works. Now we know what to look for, and just kind of off to the races. So
Right.
right now the pretzel can is on the little. We have lots of other class of thrusters that we've made. Pac-Man, call some of them. T-blade class, all metal class, radiator class, just all kinds that are in the patent work, and that's what's cool about it. You can use your imagination and come up with it. Just satisfies the requirements of having an asymmetrical field and current. Um, and then you'll see thrust. It's a very weak force. It's not a strong one. The Coulomb attraction forces between the two asymmetrical capacitor plates, the orders of magnitude stronger. So we're
Oh,
looking
wow.
at something that's very, very small.
Right.
This is probably why people have stumbled across it. Um, so, but you could put it on a spinner. You could put it on a pendulum and see this for if you're, if you're looking, but you're probably not across it.
Right.
Cool forces, which is an attraction to the wall, to the floors, to everything else, is far stronger. So we usually test in a Faraday shield, Faraday cage. We don't measure the force of a thruster. We measure it on the force of the cage in the box. What's the
Okay.
force being generated within the box, the grounded, shielded. Um, we want to eliminate all those effects. I don't like being lied to. So we want to make sure. So that's one of the ways you can prevent yourself from being fooled, encasing everything in a nice grounded, shielded box.
I see. Yeah. I mean, with
There's
all
other
those,
tricks that we flip it
uh,
around back. Yeah. Yeah,
I
there's
was,
other processes we make sure that we're not seeing something else. We flip around, make sure it goes in the correct direction. We change the voltage polarity. The voltage polarity should not make a difference, and it doesn't if you're looking at something else. So squared, right? Uh, so those are the kind of the checks and balances that you'd want to do to make sure that you're not being fooled.
Right.
Thousand ways.
Yeah, because there are
So
definitely a lot of folks that I think have a hard time acknowledging that these kinds of technologies are becoming not just maybe in the commercial space immediately, but they're certainly being worked on. And I wanted to touch on, so you mentioned that in some ways you're sort of more or less kind of open sourcing a lot of this information. And so from what I've gathered, it sounds like somebody like myself or somebody listening to this would theoretically be able to go out and develop something quite similar to what you've built and validate that for themselves. Is that a correct assumption?
yeah, I would think so. I think that's the right. I think that it'll take 20 years to convince the science community this is real.
Sure.
If you build one in your garage and you see it, I'm debating it. I would,
Right.
uh, that's what I would suggest to people. You don't take my word for it. Please don't go ahead and do it, and I think you'll be surprised. So, and that kind of eliminates a lot of that bias, and then it forces people to come to the table. Something here. What is it? What's causing it? How is this happening? Why is my brain thinking about it?
Mhm.
Because mentally we don't like to think of things that are encased, moving without expelling something out the back.
Right.
We have a hard time with that. If we get over that mental hump, then we can kind of try to take an objective look at it and say, well, how useful is this in
Right.
space? Really know that. We might be experiencing something on Earth in high vacuum that we don't know about. And then if we take this and work, like, okay, well, now I don't know who was causing it. All we can try to do is everything. Um,
Right.
and so that's really the next step is to let's get the still moves. Um, we might be wrong. That's how physics works. You have to prepare for that. Like I said, earlier with the 25 years, we were looking at the conservation of field momentum with mechanical momentum. A lot of folks for the last 100 years have been looking at that as a way to do this. Right? That's um, the not the EM drive, but the SB drive. So like kind of like the Feynman disk. So
Okay.
looking for the linear analog to that, and that's what drew me into this field. So we know that there's a momentum, a finite cross product between electric fields and magnetic fields. So there's a finite momentum, and that momentum can be converted into physical momentum. But can it happen in the linear case, like it does in the angle I've been searching for? But
Right.
I'd never found it. I thought I did or didn't, but it actually turned out to be a manifestation of this force, not what I
I
was
see.
looking for. That was the big, yeah. So that was the big paradigm shift when I just, took my thruster, which at the time was basically just a sharp metal tube, and shoved it in styrofoam. And once I did, current coming out now, so there's no magnetic field. I take out half the stupid equation and see if it still work, and it did. I was like, oh crap! So I could have done that years ago, and so it went from an electrodynamics problem to an electrostatics problem.
I see.
I know about electrostatics; that's my expertise. So I can deal with this. So
Right.
we just
Yeah, you're the subject
took it
matter
off,
expert on
hit the
electrostatics.
ground running after that.
I see. Okay. Yeah,
That's right.
I was just stating that, if anybody's going to be aware of the things that we need to look out for as potential red herrings, it's going to be somebody like yourself. So I really do appreciate just the rigorous nature with which this has been conducted. I think that's crucial because so many people are kind of slow to get onto this train. One thing that I'm curious about is as I have been doing research into the history of this kind of engineering per se. So propellant-less propulsion, ways to potentially create over unity devices, et cetera. there definitely does seem to be a history of potential suppression of that information. So I'm just curious, do you worry about your own research receiving similar treatment?
Well, we were um, we were very good. We were basically warned, crushed,
Mhm.
and we went to work on it. Um, and it took the patent office, which went through the defense, 6 months extra to to get vetted. Um, but we got through. Shock. So it was worth it though. I think it was the right move. But so fingers crossed it wasn't shut down, taken away. As far as the conspiracy or whatever, been exposed to that. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any, men following us in black or anything like that. So
Right. Yeah. Let's hope that doesn't happen. I'm sure it won't. I was curious to dive into a little bit more specifics on. I was watching a variety of your different interviews discussing your research and some of the things that you were mentioning that you were planning to do 4 months ago. I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what progress you've made. So you, for example, started talking about how you were diving into the alternating current approach as opposed to the DC approach, and that you were seeing potential performance gains from that. Has that maintained? Is that sort of a linear graph, exponential, or what's been the change of going to the AC, and has that been valuable?
we haven't really done a lot of the AC to be. We haven't given it, its due course testing.
Hmm.
That is on the docket to do. We do to first order. It's not like what we're used to with AC, where you want to increase the energy, start increasing the frequency, right? It doesn't work here. So we do know that. So it's a first order effect, but it might have second order effects that
Right.
we don't know of. We think there might be some effects, second order effects, but not to the one-to-one where I increase the frequency, I increase the thrust. It,
Right.
we've tested up to 100,000 gigahertz, whatever. It's just not there. Might be other. We'd have to redesign our systems to test that. That's what we've learned. We'd have to, redesign everything. So we're just going to finish out with what we're doing, um, and then hopefully we'll get some funding, because of the this new uh, game that we've got a few days. Someone will give us some money to test some of these things that would be worth doing. So then we can have time and money to look at the other. There are many pathways to travel down, and the AC is one of them.
Cool.
But to first order doesn't seem to help.
I see. Okay, so it's kind of a
AC is
nuanced.
tough because you can be fooled with A2. It's kind of a nuance, and now you're starting to make magnetic fields. You start making magnetic fields, now you're coupling with the Earth's magnetic field. So you're going to more noise in your system that you have to somehow. That it's not trivial,
Right.
but it's certainly uh, give up on it.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
just, I'm just not going to give up on.
as I was reading your patent, I stumbled across a part where you were talking about how, from what I understand, you need the Earth's magnetic field in order to operate this device. Is that a correct understanding? So how would this behave? This is kind of, I guess, something else I was curious about in a zero gravity environment. I mean, you could be far enough from the Earth that you still have the magnetic field, but once we start trying to travel to Mars, for example, or something similar to that, do you think these same principles are going to play out on those um, stages?
You shouldn't need the Earth field for anything.
Okay,
I mean, there's the magnet's incredibly weak. You don't
I
need
see.
it for this. Uh, all I'm saying is if you're making AC system, you'll probably interact with that field. This is a
Okay.
DC system, expected to interact with it. Um, Maybe one of the things that I'd say at the conference was there's or momentum anomaly on spacecraft that could
Hmm.
be explained by this effect. Those are satellites that go through the Van Allen, through the Earth's magnetic field, and get charged up. And once they get charged up, they uh, they all of a sudden have a new momentum. So there's some kind of momentum anomaly that appear in satellites where engineers don't know where it's coming from. And the only thing that they can correlate that to is that they're getting charged going through the going through this Van Allen belts. So that would happen. This might explain it.
Oh, okay.
Because now you're adding charge to surfaces in a very asymmetrical way, but that need the Earth's magnetic field to see this force, all force.
Okay.
But you don't need
That
it.
makes
It's not
sense.
necessary. So I wouldn't expect it to affect.
Right. One thing that I wanted to point out, somebody in the comments of, I believe it was Tim's video, was talking about how even if we were just to be accelerating at 1G, for example, that's going to still dramatically reduce travel times. So I think you get to, maybe it was Mars in something like 80 days instead of a much longer time frame. So there's, just because it's a weak force doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of potential applications. So I'm curious, what are the applications that you foresee? And obviously you're trying to get funding for this. So how are you presenting this to potential investors as your, what's the roadmap in this case?
That's a good question. And I would that the investors would want to have weigh in on that. First thing anyone would want us to do is in space just to see, okay, function as expected. After that, it's fair game. A lot of uses for it. Right now, this is newer than the APEC information, but I believe you can get to the 2 hours
Oh, wow.
with our current thrust levels, and to Mars in 5 days.
Oh,
Theoretically, if we did this.
right.
So, uh, you could imagine a simple return mission where you just use, like you go Earth, you go to Mars, you pick up your rock, and you come back in 10 days. Can you imagine that? Theoretically, we should be able to
Space
do that
mining.
with our. We
Yeah.
don't have space mining. That's right. You don't have to. Means it's a moving turtle, but it does move if you keep the foot on the gas. So it's quite fast. Um, so yeah, you can
I see.
all over the solar system in relatively short time. So it's fair game. Anything's possible in space. Earth gravity is the hard part, and I verify the graph that's in the APEC presentation. You get a lot of confusion on that. It shows us unity. What does that mean? People says, oh, you can levitate a surface. Well, hold on. That graph is the way we use it to it's our thrust ratio versus the thrust that we make divided by the mass of the thruster, whatever that thruster is. And that does not include all the rules, the wires, the power supply, the housing, all the other things that go along with it. We're not optimizing those, optimizing the thruster. So what that means is you have over 1G, which basically, theoretically, if we take that thruster and should lift in Earth's gravity on the surface where we are. But don't set up our tests that way. It'd be very hard to have no shielding. If you do vacuum chamber, you'd be attracted to the walls. You'd have the shielding away. You'd have to, the wires are heavy, things to it. It's not the easiest test in the world. It's
Right.
not at all easy. Not saying we haven't tried, but it's very, very difficult. Kind of like saying that engine has enough thrust, enough momentum to move the engine, but nothing else. Not very
Right.
useful. Car with passengers, not a very useful engine. So but it's great for the engine. I can move myself, but
Yeah.
it's not good for anyone else. So we need to carry a payload. We need to be significantly higher thrust than our system start demonstrating in Earth gravity. And
Right.
we're just not there yet. We'd probably have to be at least another order of magnitude in force
Okay. So it's a
before
similar
we're
problem to the rocket
useful in Earth. But
problem.
that doesn't mean we're not useful in space.
Yeah, I see. It's
Yep,
similar in the sense that
that's right.
for using fuel, every time you add the mass of the fuel, you now have to carry that mass, and so it's diminishing returns. But I guess what I would say is, from what I've understood, with your device, as it gets smaller, you don't necessarily see a decrease in the thrust. So that's sort of a reverse of that. That's kind of why this is so intriguing.
Yeah, because you got to come two angles. You got to thrust, but less mass,
I see.
and you can do that. And it's been exciting. So when you when you do both at the same time, then things are much better to the point yet that where lifting twice the mass or four times the mass. Um, that obviously has Earth applications.
Right.
Planes, trains, cars, everything would change. We're not there, but we
Okay.
can't get there. Just it's not there yet. But for space applications, we're more than adequate for moving things around, even large things around in space, very large things.
Right. Would, just out of
Except the
curiosity,
temperature,
would
that's all.
slowing down be a problem, or would you just kind of use the same process you use to speed up in that case?
Well, when we do the 2 hours or the 5 day, that's speeding up, slowing down halfway, right? That's acceleration and then deceleration.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So you basically accelerate and then decelerate to zero.
So you don't smack into
Right?
Mars.
That's the simplest way to get somewhere. You don't want to smack it. Doesn't do you any good to get to Mars if you smash into it.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm curious. So you've mentioned that essentially kind of the underlying principle perhaps is this idea of trying to figure out ways to engineer asymmetric electrostatic pressures. And in this case, you found
That's one of them.
a particular way to do that. Are there any other interesting methods? I've heard of things like, and I'm not sure that this is related, but ideas like rotating certain metals, mercury, for example, or magnets. Are there other interesting things that you guys have maybe not yet been able to try, which would generate a similar asymmetric electrostatic pressure?
We haven't once we as it was an electrostatic pressure force. We haven't gone back to magnetism
Hmm.
um, or liquids. We haven't done too many things with liquids. Liquids are change shape. Tough to control that shape. Um, Trying to imagine what this would be. I'm missing it. I don't know, but um, you know, there's two for it. Electrostatic pressure force, asymmetry of the capacitors, the surface elements,
Hmm.
and the divergence in E force, which we call the divine force. It's a word, Exodus, divine force, and that is the internal, the volume elements. So you have the volume and the surface elements. So get created within the volume, or just whichever way you choose. But I can't see how that really helps in the static case. Who knows? We'll get to super high frequency someday and another role. Maybe it's there. I don't
Hmm.
know. Liquids, I I can't imagine, but maybe there's some kind of role that liquids can play.
Okay.
Dielectrics certainly do play. Materials matter. There are ways of permittivity matters because we're talking about fields, dielectric constant, all of those things matter.
Gotcha.
Things that matter, and there's things that shouldn't matter that we haven't really looked into. Uh, but it doesn't mean that someone else can't look at it. Maybe magnetic pressure is real.
Hmm.
What about magnetostatic pressure? Like the
Right.
electric, maybe magnetic pressures. I have faith in that just because I know magnetic fields don't those do work. But someone wants to look at magnetic pressure, go ahead.
Certainly.
But
Yeah, I'm always just curious to
electrostatic
kind of
pressure
know.
does.
I'm always
And
just
there's a
curious to get
lot
an
of
idea. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, you're fine. But that's basically why we really haven't looked into it.
I see. Yeah, I think it's helpful for
Before
others.
we knew it was statics, yeah, before when we read it was an electrostatic pressure or some kind of a divergent electric field force, um, we spent a lot of time looking at magnets because we're looking at E cross B field momentum,
Right.
and that's E cross B. You got to make a B field. So there was a lot of magnetism there. But since we need the B field, boy, it's that simplifies a lot. 'Cause making magnetic fields are really tough.
Right.
heavy. They're very tough to do. So if we don't need it, why do it? So much simpler.
Let's optimize. Exactly. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we are starting to get to time here. I actually only have the 45 minutes since we're on the Zoom call today. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping it up. There was something we mentioned TT Brown, and I was just curious. I know that NASA did a breakthrough propulsion research back in the 90s, but I'm not aware of anybody that's stated, "Hey, I tested the Byfield-Brown effect in vacuum, and it definitely didn't work," or "It did work in some way." Are you aware of a study that's actually taken this to vacuum and like truly validated that this is exclusively an ion wind?
They did a very simple test. They only put on it. So I think it was a rod and a plane. To get the fields that you need for this effect, they need to be much higher fields. 19,000 volts wasn't enough for their geometry. I think T. Thomas Brown, I don't know if he did stuff in vacuum. Honestly, I don't really know. I know he did stuff in oil. He's still effect, so that would eliminate ion wind and stuff like that.
Right.
Do know that he probably did a lot of ion wind stuff also.
Mhm.
But so he probably had a mixed bag. I don't think he knew what force, because we know with the electrostatic force, voltage is important. You don't need millivolts field. But he was using voltages because that would give him very large fields. But you
Right.
don't need very large to make very fields. So, um, so, but there's not many studies of the T-tone effect in that I know of,
Okay. So it sounds like Brown was using a
other than what we're
sledgehammer
doing.
and you're using a scalpel.
Probably, yeah,
Okay.
I
Right
would
on.
say so.
Sweet. Well, I really
Fair
appreciate your
assessment.
time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying that was a fair assessment
Okay.
analogy.
Dealing with some connection today. So thank you everybody for bearing with us. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to make sure to mention tonight? And how can people get in touch with you or follow up with you and learn more about this?
The easiest way is through our website, exoduspropulsion.space. That's the easiest way, or our link page, which uh, started to get quite a few followers. Those two social media platforms are helpful, and we are going to put a lot more content on them very
Okay.
soon. So that's the easiest. Keep up with what we're doing. Um, we're finally out of the dark